Hi, I'm Amara Abbas, and you're listening to Culture Study.
What's up, everyone? I'm Omar Issa, and welcome to Culture Study. In this episode, I'm joined by Amara Abbas, an award-winning director and filmmaker based in Brooklyn, New York. Amara is a very dear friend of mine and a gem of a human who I've been a fan of since I first met in 2016. She spent the bulk of her career as an in-house art director at a little-known company called Apple, where she crafted award-winning campaigns and films for iPhone, iOS, and iPad. Her developing interest in filmmaking led her to become a full-time director, and in just a few short months, Amara signed with Iconoclast and New Land TV, where she is quickly rising the ranks in the creative world. As a first-generation Pakistani American filmmaker, Amara's perspective is incredibly inspiring, and I appreciate her vulnerability in sharing some very personal challenges and triumphs. I hope you all enjoyed this episode, and I ask that you share it with one other person who would enjoy it as well. You can follow us on Instagram and tag us when you listen. Our handle is @CultureStudy. And you can also watch us on YouTube and Spotify. Just search Culture Study Podcast. Thank you so much. Peace. Super excited for you to be here, and also wanted to start off with a congratulations, because I know you just recently were awarded the Young Guns 20 award, which celebrates creative professionals aged 30 or younger. And it's by the One Club for Creativity, right? Which is a pretty prestigious award to be receiving. So congratulations.
Thank you.
You have been a director for just over a year, right? Ish,
Yeah,
almost two?
I think a year and a half.
Year and a half?
Pretty new.
How do you feel receiving an award like this after just like a year and a half of being a full-time director?
Oh man, it's super humbling, you know? Like I feel like people are just always like constantly working, like you don't like lift your head above water to see what's happening around you. So it's nice when people like stop you along the way and kind of give you your flowers and celebrate you, and you stop to celebrate other people and even yourself a little. I think is encouraging and keeps you going. But it was really cool. I got to see like my peers, and you're watching everyone's work on this big screen, and it's all things that you've seen in the world before, but you just didn't know who made it. So I was inspired by everybody, and I think it's cool to have like a class of, I don't know, creative individuals around the world who are doing interesting things and kind of moving together. I was
Yeah.
just humbled. It's cool. It was very full circle for me because I didn't know about the program until I started advertising like in 2015 or something. Um, so it was like a big milestone for me.
Did you give a speech?
Thankfully, I did not give a speech.
Okay. But you had an interview.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what was your what was the gist? Like what did you share with the world when they were asking you about this award?
Um, they were just
When they
asking,
were
well,
honoring you?
oh, like it was, so I was actually in Paris when I found out that I got it, and I was writing a script, and I was like, had some major writer's block that day, and it was like raining. I think I was like depressed because I was just hitting like a writer's block, and then I found out, and I was really encouraged, so I started answering some of the questions at that time. Um, and I think they were really, I mean, they're really simple questions that were kind of reflective, like advice for other filmmakers or people who are in the industry, and kind of my own reflections. So it made me stop and think, but I'm trying to remember. One of the questions was, what's your personal brand? Which I remember that one because I had to close my laptop. I was like, I have no idea how to answer that because I don't see myself as a personal brand. Um,
What do you see yourself as?
I don't know, just like a human. Like I think I responded saying something like it was like three words that you had to use, or three like adjectives or something, I can't remember. I think I just said an internationalist with like some sense of curiosity, and I don't know, I said something else. Maybe you should
Yeah.
read the interview.
Yeah. Check the interview out. It's on the One Club for Creativity. This website. um that's amazing. And so I guess just like closing that out, but just kind of in reflecting on this achievement, what have you learned about yourself as a filmmaker thus far?
Um, I think to stay true to my identity, like and my creative vision, and kind of honoring that. Because if I can't do that, then I don't think I would do well at my job. Sometimes it's hard when there's so many voices around you, kind of influencing you. So, kind of tuning that out when you need to, staying true to your vision and your identity, and maintaining that throughout the entire process. But also being considerate of what everyone is saying around you. You just have to be like smart about when you can turn it on and off. Um, I think that's the biggest learning that I've had.
That's beautiful. Um, I was thinking because I was one, I've obviously like followed your work for a very long time prior to you officially turning like transitioning over to being a director.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think there's like a common thread that has kind of stayed true throughout your work, whether it was photography and editorial or like working with other brands or your art direction at Apple, and now to some of the pieces that you worked on for yourself and for clients. Um, but I wrote down how describe your work, which is visually stunning, emotional, visceral, meaning it like sparks something inside of myself and the viewer, um, and moody. Those are like the ways that I would describe.
Those are good words. Visceral is a good word.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
thesaurus.com. Um, no, but seriously, those are kind of the ways that I would describe them. How would you describe your work?
I don't know. I feel like it's one of those things where you kind of just are doing it, and then I think people tell you what they notice about your films so that it becomes like this thread, but I don't think I'm thinking that when I'm making it. I just try to make sure that everything I'm talking about seems like it's coming from an honest intention. So, like, some source of truth in the story or the character, the narrative. And if I can honor that, then the rest is like style, right? Like, it's like your like artistic approach, your execution, your texture that you can't kind of place is just like that's part of what I mean by maintaining my identity is not just like me as like Pakistani director, more like what's your visual style, as what's your visual identity. I don't know what it is, it just kind of comes out.
Mm, interesting. I love that. And actually, I have more questions about your creative process too, which we'll get to. But many of which stem or are focused around your voice as an artist. And so whether you have the answers or not, we're gonna get to those questions. But I'm curious now, thinking about just like film as a whole and kind of in the state of the world that we're in. I'm actually just curious about what you have been consuming recently. Like, where are you gaining inspiration? Are there any films that have inspired you recently? And maybe we'll start there.
Yeah, I think inspiration comes from two places. So the first I think could be like consuming other art. So films, like paintings, art history, like reading, all of those things I think can help you with like execution and taste, and even like maybe broader themes like Greek mythology or Shakespeare. Everything seems to kind of boil down to those things. And then there's inspiration in just like life, like conversations and travel and food and you know, like people talking to other people. I think is when you're probably gonna get like your best ideas through conversation. I find so for source material, I think it's people. And then for everything else, like execution, flow, style, texture, I think that comes from studying cinema or other mediums of art, I find. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What have you been studying recently?
Well, there's a couple of films I think that came out this year that are pretty interesting, like Triangle of Sadness, I love.
We talked about that one
Did you watch it?
offline. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's
Did
oh
I
yeah.
watch it? We literally
Oh
spoke
yeah.
about
Balenciaga.
it.
H&M.
That was, yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean I love that director. I think his name is like Ruben Ostwald or something like Ostrom. No, he's incredible. He's super smart, clever, kind of like absurd, which I like.
Yeah.
And then there was this other film that I watched really recently that I've been thinking about because it's kind of like I just haven't seen like a Muslim filmmaker do something like that yet recently, and she's a woman. Her name is Tina Amer, and she did this film called You Resemble Me, which is like about like the Europe's first like ISIS suicide bomber,
Wow.
which I was like, why is somebody making a film about that? And then actually, it was super fascinating because this director was like a journalist for Vice at the time, and it was like a false headline that was not true. So her whole like mission with this film was kind of to like undo that false headline and kind of like see who is this woman, what led her to even be involved with this radical group of people, and it has a lot to do with like society not knowing how to like help
Mm.
a child, um, and like loneliness and mental health actually. So I don't think we get to see that kind of stuff with Muslims. I feel like we see it in like Jeffrey Dahmer and like
Yeah.
Ted Bundy. But
Yeah.
so I was really fascinated by that. I think it was a poetic film. And then just like the classics, I think there's a lot of filmmakers that I really admire. Um, Jean-Luc Godard, just like French New Wave. Abbas Kiarostami is like this Iranian filmmaker. Modern day director, I love Denis Villeneuve. He did like Blade Runner 2049 and
Very cool.
Incendies, Sicario, the new Dune. I just like think he's does great with sound, which I feel like a lot of directors kind of forget about sometimes. Um, but yeah, there's tons. Could talk all day.
Yeah. That it's so interesting that you mentioned sound too, because I was like um also doing a little bit of research and rewatching a lot of the films and the short films that you put together. I feel like you do such a great job with sound. Like it's a really impactful part of even your website, by the way, which I know you meant you're like it's outdated, but just like the experience of scrolling through your site and then kind of interacting with, um, you know, the videos and the pieces that you've created. Sound plays a really big part in the way that you even transition scenes, and like you just do a really beautiful job of that. So props
Thank
to you on
you.
that.
Yeah, Omar was crying when he was looking through my website. I think the piano was too
It was a
emotional.
very emotional experience, which actually is interesting because you were just talking about sound and a director who does that well. So I'm curious about what makes a great director to you.
um, I think a great director surrounds himself with people who are way better than them. Like, not better, but I think stronger in their arenas is like the right word. So, yeah, you have a strong sense of self, but you have a really strong group of people around you. So, any director works with like a big crew, like it's a big film village. So, you have like sound designers, you have editors, you have a cinematographer, a DP, you have your focus puller, gaffer who does lighting, art director. Like, there's a million people involved. So, the cool thing about being a director is you get to touch all of those things, but you have people who are experts in those specific avenues. So I think like listening to people who might take your seed of an idea and grow it into this like beautiful flower, each person is doing that. You come out with a film or like a beautiful garden, you know?
Yeah,
So,
I love that. Um, I want to rewind and I want to talk about your roots a little bit.
wicka
Well done.
wick.
You grew up in Chicago. Were you born in Chicago?
I was born in Chicago, but I was raised like in a suburb outside of the city.
Okay.
Hmm.
Um, so raised in suburb outside of the city, born in Chicago,
Hmm.
to Pakistani immigrant parents,
Yeah.
um, Muslim.
Yes.
What was all that like? Like what stands out from your childhood when you think about when you reflect on it, your upbringing?
Well, Chicago is like a super diverse city. So it was cool. I was growing up with people who were like completely from different backgrounds, which I loved. Um, but I don't know. I mean, I'm the eldest daughter in an immigrant family, so I feel like that says a lot, already. But I mean, my parents were really cool. Like they're quite liberal, I think, growing up, but traditional about certain things. Um, so I'm a middle child also, so I have an older brother and a little sister. Um, but I think my family is like they're my best friends, you know?
I love
So
that.
we're pretty close. But I mean, growing up, I had a younger sister who was 8 years younger than me, and that's like a pretty big difference when you're kind of in grade school and high school. So my mom would like make me bring her everywhere when I'd go hang out with my friends, be like, oh, we're going to the movies and then going to this person's house. And my mom would be like, you have to take Alicia. And I was like, oh, you're so embarrassing. And now that girl is like my best friend. She's like,
Oh, I love
you
that.
know,
Shout out to Alicia.
shout out to Alicia.
She got it easy, huh? She just followed everything you were doing. She
She's
she
like,
she didn't need to make the friends. The friends were already there for her.
honestly, yeah,
Uh,
it's true. But
yeah.
she's like cooler than me in every way possible.
I can't relate to that because I'm not cooler than you, but I can relate to being the youngest and just having everything kind of
Maybe.
sorted for you. So shout out to my sisters as well. Um, I'm curious about just like growing up, kind of what life was like inside your home versus outside. Like, what did you feel like you were this essentially the same person kind of existing in those spaces, or did you feel like you had to kind of um, like were there certain things that you had to navigate, meaning like being in a traditional, maybe Pakistani, but also somewhat liberal
Hmm.
household versus growing up in a Western major city?
I mean, yeah, I think I think every kid learns how to code switch, right? When you're in your house and then when you go to school. So it was different for that reason. And I think when you're young, like there was diversity around, but I think, the cool kids were white. Like,
Yeah,
so you kind of switch, you kind of dilute, like maybe your more Pakistani side to assimilate. But I think by the time I was like in college, I was really over that. And I don't think I became really aware of my identity until I started working. Not really in school because there were so many different kinds of people, but more when I was working in advertising is when I became like hyper aware of my identity and actually how different I was than everyone else.
in
And
that
like,
in that space.
mm-hmm, yeah.
What was that like?
Um,
Like that realization, and how did you kind of go about navigating a very white space in advertising?
yeah, I think, well, here's the thing is you might see a lot of diversity in the places that you work at, but the people who you're reporting to and who they're reporting to, basically anyone who's in positions of power, they're all white guys, right? That I think is what I had a hard time kind of understanding, like that dynamic. Um, but I mean, like I remember when I was at this agency, I was like a very shy person when I went into it was like my first job, well, my second job, but um, I remember I was shy and I had these ideas and I was too shy to present them, and I would maybe like have my partner present them, who was a really cool white guy.
Hmm.
And then at the end, I didn't get this job. I didn't get hired, and they were like, you're not really, you're kind of shy. And I was like, oh man, I think I need to like undo this. I need to like work on being more vocal. But I think the shyness came from not feeling fully comfortable because of my background. But you kind of have to learn the language of those spaces, and then I think once you do, it becomes a lot easier. And once you become more proud of your background and understand that those ideas that you have as an individual who's different, those ideas will help you kind of progress and make people connect.
Yeah, it's really interesting because the work that I do is focused in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we have these conversations all the time.
Yeah.
Um, one of the common um, sentiments from like folks that I work with or that I work with in the space, or people of color, like essentially is around how either it's like a kind of a state of imposter syndrome, like a constant state of imposter syndrome, or a state of not feeling safe in the space and not safe, in like a physical, like at
Hmm.
risk type of environment, but more so just feeling like your voice is being heard or that you're empowered to share. Um, so I think that's really interesting that kind of crosses over as well into the work that you're doing. Um, is there anything else when I think what I'm gonna kind of keep moving forward, but is there anything else when you think about your upbringing, your roots, your family, um, that you take with you and or that maybe has um, driven you when you think about the work that you do now and how and kind of your journey as in your career?
Yeah, I mean, I think about my father. He's like classic immigrant hustler, came here with not a lot, Like he's kind of like this the person that keeps me going, I think, because he's just such a hard worker. So, I mean, he came here, he had like a master's degree in macroeconomics, came here first, I think he went to London, then he went to New York, then he ended up in Chicago, and he was just like, you know, working in hotels. He was like delivering pizza. He was like doing restaurant management. And then he started his own business, and he's kind of been doing that ever since. But he's like the one person who I think is highly, highly intellectual person who just worked really, really hard and took a lot of calculated risk, I think. And I feel like that spirit is just inside of me. And like, even when I told them I wanted to do this kind of work, they were like, why would you do that? It's not very secure. And, standard Desi parents. And I was like, well, why do you think I'm like this? Like, you're like this. So I always think about him, and I think about, I mean, both my parents. My mom was just always, she was working. She was like superwoman, amazing mom, amazing sister to her siblings, like amazing everything. So their spirit, I think, is just inside of me always.
I love that. Um, Talk to me, and actually, I was going to ask you about what your parents think of the work that you do as a filmmaker, but you answered it. It sounds like they're now very supportive, yeah.
Yeah, it took a minute.
It took becoming an award-winning filmmaker, director, or
Yeah, it took a while. Even now, they're like, sure you want to do this? But I mean, they're so proud of me. My dad is so sweet. He said something that makes me like so emotional, which is like, um, you know how when you go to places where your family is very well known, like a family party or some kind of event, and people think of you as someone's daughter? You're Naveed's daughter. Oh, you're Selma's daughter. He says, I can't wait for the day where I walk into a room and everyone says, oh, you're Amara's dad,
wow,
which is so sweet.
yeah. Wow, that's a beautiful way to like express love
Yeah, it's
and
very
support.
sweet. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So he's very supportive and super excited.
That's amazing. Talk to me about your relationship with faith, like maybe throughout your journey, right? Like I feel like, and the reason I ask is because I think um, it's a theme that comes up in a lot of your work. Um, if you think about Ucht, like the sister, which is one of the projects that's in process right now, but also just the way that you tell stories in general and your identity. Um, yeah, how do you what would you say about your relationship with your faith and then how does that kind of influence the work that you do?
Um, I mean, I'm pretty close to my faith is Islam, but I came became a lot closer to it, I think, in my early 20s. Like when I moved away from home, actually, I got much closer to my religion. I think in some way to feel close to my family, and then I just studied it in a different way that I think I had growing up. Um, but it was more like, I mean, practicing, yes, but more in a place of spirituality and believing in things that you can't see and kind of trusting Allah and trusting the universe. So I don't know. I mean, everyone who practices the faith of Islam kind of knows that it feels more like a lifestyle than just a religion. Like just more than an organized religion, it feels like a lifestyle. You wake up, every decision you make kind of boils down to this thing that you're thinking about in the back of your head maybe all the time that you're very conscious of. So obviously, I think because it's in my subconscious pretty much all the time, it must somehow bleed into my work, right? Um, I didn't know that it did actually, except for in the Uchtman, which is about two girls who are kind of understanding their identity as Muslim women. I don't know. It was a bit more like introspective. I think I had to look inside a lot and look at the people around me and It's just a very honest kind of documentation of what it's like to grapple with that every single day, but in a very short form.
I love that. So, in thinking about your transition to a full-time director, artist, creative, professional, kind of away from the corporate world, what did you take away from your experiences, in your time with your time at Apple, or elsewhere, that maybe benefits you as a creative and as a filmmaker, as a director?
I think so. I think Apple is known for its precision, attention to detail, kind of obsession to attention to detail. I think they're a little neurotic in a very important way, and I think that's helped me a lot with my approach to my craft. But also, like, they have like such captivating people at that company, and they have like a post production house inside of the company where there's like tons of editors and sound designers and colorists, and you get to just sit with people for like hours, for days and days and days, and like kind of cut something together. So I don't know, I'm the type of person who learns by seeing and doing. So I just learned a lot about like rhythm and flow and taste, and they share a lot of references of very obscure old movies, and so they taught me a lot. I felt like a bit like it was my film school, and it kind of prepared me for that transition. And also at the time, once you sell a project and like you're the creative that gets to work with a director in making these commercials, and luckily to be at a company like Apple, they have like world-class directors that they get to work with, people who are doing big movies and stop and do an Apple commercial, and you get to see like the insight to some of their process and the storyboards, and these creative conversations, and DPs who've shot like huge Oscar winning films, and so you get like a first-hand look at their process, and I think that helped me prepare for what it would be like on the outside. But can anything ever really prepare you from going from corporate to freelance? Kind of, maybe not. Like, you just have to take the leap at some point. So I was scared for a long time, and I think I was, I come from a family where security is so important. That's like such a big part of being first gen. I think to have security is an important thing. So to walk away from one of the most secure companies in the world was very scary. But I think like that process kind of equipped me mentally to know what I was getting myself into. But at some point, you just have to take a risk.
What was the point that, or at what point did you feel that you were ready to take that risk? Like, why did you decide to leave kind of your really comfortable corporate Bay Area art directing gig?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I mean, I don't think I knew that I wanted to be a filmmaker until I was there, because I didn't know what was possible for me in that way. Like, even thinking about film, I think the closest thing I could get to film was through advertising, doing commercials, doing short films. I hadn't seen anybody who was actually doing filmmaking, and I don't think I had the vocabulary to know that's what I wanted to do until I got there. And then I was like, oh shit, I don't want to do commercials. I want to do like other things where I can be very honest, and I'm not maybe just selling something, but the benefit of being at a company like Apple is that it was so cinematic in its approach. But I think there was a moment. What happened is like a couple of people told me like you would be really good at directing, and I was like, oh, I'd never thought about directing in that way. Like, I always thought there was like a creative individual who had the idea, and I wanted to be that individual, but that's because I came from a commercial background. And then I was like, oh, people who are actually in filmmaking, they get to do everything. They get to come up with the idea, they get to direct, they get to do all of it. And that's very much what I wanted to do. And I think when I started to watch these very obscure films, like during my time at Apple, like these really interesting films, I became really captivated by that. And I was like, maybe this is something that I can do. But it wasn't until I released like my short film, my first short film, that I was like, I think I'm ready.
Hmm.
There was a director who gave me a really good piece of advice when I was at Apple, and he's like, you got to quit your job if you want to pursue directing. And I was like, oh, what? And he said, directing is a very, very selfish endeavor. Like it's very, you have to be obsessed. You have to be really obsessed. You have to think about it night and day. You have to think about your ideas. You have to live with your characters. You have to write. You can't have like a full-time job where you're working until 10 p.m. every day and then like have the capacity to do something else that's also kind of in the same wheelhouse. Like you're using the same part of your brain where you're writing, you're researching, and you're looking at art references, but it's just too much for one person. So I started thinking about it for years, but I didn't pull the trigger until after the film was out. I think I was ready after that.
And this was Twin Flame.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Um, yeah, that's beautiful. I'm curious about Twin Flame as a project, and just thinking about it being your first, directorial debut, really, right? Like first thing that you really
Yeah, it
put out into the
was.
world. Can you talk to me about the process of creating that? Like,
Yeah. Well, I was like, I just need to do something that's not commercial. I have so many little ideas in my head, but before that project came to be, I was like about to do a music video for an artist, and it was a very low budget music video, and I was like so excited about it. We were going to shoot it in LA, and then kind of fell apart like last minute because of COVID, and you know, there was some issues with the label, money, and then the artist couldn't come to be, and I was so devastated because I'd worked so hard on it. And so at that point, I was like, okay, what can I do with what is within my own means where I don't have to rely on anyone else?
mm,
And I had like was kind of dealing with something emotionally at the time, and I had just written it down on like a little piece of paper. And it was just a couple of sentences. It was just describing this feeling, and I hit up like a DP, he's a really talented DP named Freddie Whitman, who actually was like a camera operator on the Ucht film, that one scene
oh
that I
wow.
shot. He's a very talented Bay Area DP. And I called him and I told him about it, and like we jumped into shoot like the next weekend, and we shot the whole thing, and then it was quite quick. It was a quite quick process. I think there was like maybe 5 people involved. So basically I got like my Apple bonus. And I was like, okay, I know what I'm spending this on. And it was like
A
we shot it
A
in a
Bottega
loft.
bag.
I wish.
No, I'm just playing. It was the
This is a
film.
better investment, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
It was fast though. We shot it quickly. There was a small crew because of COVID at the time. So I think it was like 3 people in the film, completely 3 people only. And then our DP, our gaffer, a person to assist, like a PA. Yeah, it was short. It was just a couple of people. It was short and sweet. And I worked on it though in post for a while because we were all working, and it was like our side baby.
Mm.
So it took like maybe like 5 or 6 months actually to edit the whole thing, color the whole thing, sound design it, all of that. Um, but I didn't even know if I was gonna put it out. I just wanted to do something for me, and it was like such a, I think, kind of personal piece. But I felt really good just releasing it. I was like, I think I should share this with the world, and I had quite a positive response, which I wasn't expecting,
Yeah,
but it was really humbling. So
it was really well received.
yeah,
Like, I think it had a couple like nominations, or it was,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I went to a couple of festivals
yeah.
and like Holly Shorts Festival and a couple others, and it was cool. I was really excited about it.
What did you in that process, that kind of 5, 6 month process of creating it, what did you then kind of pull into the next projects that you started working on, and kind of, yeah, I guess what did you learn from it?
I mean, every project is different. The cool thing about that one, which is really funny from the Ucht film, which is like that project has taken like years to even make, and this one took like days
Hmm.
to make, actually, like to shoot it, which I think is like getting the shoot done is kind of the hardest part for me. Um, so every project has its own like lifeline. So I don't know. I don't know if there's like a specific learning from that one completely, but what I loved about that one was that it was so experimental. Like I had some shots that I knew I needed to get like my story across, but there was a lot of room for play, like which I felt like I had never had the opportunity to do, to just run around with the camera and like try a couple different things,
Interesting.
you know?
Because that Apple life was very
Not, mm-mm. It's very
strict.
methodical.
Yeah,
Like we're
yeah.
not playing around. It's like it's very serious, very serious. But I mean, it's fun to do it, but I think to just be free with the camera is like such a rare thing, and everybody involved in the process was kind of in the same space where we just wanted to experiment. And even my DP, he had like some really interesting ideas of what would happen if we shot anamorphic, but we also shot it like a film, and what about this lighting? And it was kind of fun for all of us to try new things. But yeah, I feel like I learned a lot just through trying new things and listening. My editor was really great on that project too. I went in and I was like, I think we should use this song, and this is the pacing, and he like cut it like the way that I said, and I was like, oh, this is really bad. Like, we should not do that. And he just had such good ideas, and we talked about it. And so listening, I learned how to listen to people. Um, so yeah,
That's so important. Like I love that you just said that.
yeah,
The ability to kind of um, adapt to what actually makes the most sense for the work itself.
yeah. They say you write a film 3 times, so it's when you write it on the page, like your script, then you actually get the footage, so you rewrite it basically because what you shot could be completely different than what you have on screen to some degree, obviously. And then the third time that you write is when you're editing. It's like your
Mm,
final draft is your edit, and sometimes what you think is going to be there and certain scenes get lost, you know? Um, so yeah.
interesting. Um, you are a female Pakistani film director,
I am a
filmmaker.
female. I'm a female.
um, but I say that, and the reason I say that as like its own sentence is because um, I don't know of many film directors that fit a similar description of your identity. Obviously, we all have many layers to our identity, but you're brown, you're Muslim, you're Pakistani, you're a woman of color. Um, I'm curious about if there's anyone who's paved the way for you, and whether that's as in the creative world or just in the film industry as a whole. Um, like, who do you look up to?
You mean like someone who's from the same background as me?
I don't know. Is there anyone who's paved the way from a similar background, or is there nobody to refer to?
I mean, I think there's a lot of amazing filmmakers that have influenced me, but I don't know if they come from. I don't know any female Pakistani filmmakers yet.
Hmm.
So, no, I don't have a reference point in that regard. But I think there's a lot of filmmakers that are doing interesting things. Like, of course, I think Rami is like a big one for all of us, who has kind of opened many doors and paved the way. And he's not a woman, but he's a Muslim,
Hmm.
which I think is like important enough. Like thinking about the ummah, like a larger scale. But I think it's gonna happen in time. Like I think a lot of it has to do with us being first gen. Like I look at other communities and I'm like, well, how come they have so many more people, or so many more artists who are like, from the diaspora and doing interesting things? And I think it's like our families are so new. So like I have a lot of respect for like there's a lot of amazing black artists, a lot of amazing black filmmakers, and I'm like, how come like Pakistanis and Muslims aren't like on that level? And I'm like, maybe it's just because we haven't had a lot of time here yet. Like I imagine how many filmmakers there's going to be like 3 generations from now. There's probably going to be a lot. So I think it just takes a minute.
Yeah. I'm curious about what it's like to be a woman of color in the industry at the moment.
I think the struggle comes from like when I'm dealing with someone with an issue in the process and I don't have someone to talk to about it who comes from a similar background as me. That's when I really feel it. but I feel like there's a general appetite for different kinds of storytelling right now. It's like a very exciting time. And I think I got very lucky to be with like a team who wants to hear those kinds of stories and are like giving me the resources to tell those kinds of stories. But sometimes it's like, well, I would love to know what another Muslim artist thinks of this very Muslim material
Mm,
who has like really good taste and, comes from a background of where they can critique it so that we can make it better. But I think right now I just have to look inward and trust myself because I don't have a lot of those peers yet, and hopefully that will change. Um, you know,
yeah. Tell me about your transition to signing with Iconoclast. Like, how did all of that come about so early in your career? You went from taking a leap of faith.
got an Iconoclast hat on.
You're represented.
Represent.
I love it. But you took a leap of faith and made a decision to pursue a career as a director, as a
Yeah,
filmmaker. And shortly after, you signed to a really, really reputable um, agency company.
yeah. So it was all because of that little film we talked about, Twin Flame. Uh, that project actually changed lives for like a lot of us. So thankfully for me, I think it got me signed. That was the thing that got me signed. And for my editor, it got him a job at a really amazing editing house. And for my DP, I think he signed shortly afterwards to another agency. But when it came out, I started getting messages from production companies. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like, usually it takes like a couple of films to get signed, Like, you need to show more than one project. You have to show usually like at least 3 films that you've done. Usually they're better if it's short. So I wasn't expecting anything like that to happen. I just knew that I had to leave Apple to do more films, even on my own. Um, I didn't expect to get signed so quickly. So I started getting messages from one production house in particular I really loved called Newland, which is like a European production house. And I'm signed with them also in Sweden and Copenhagen. But I was talking to for months first, actually. And then when I put my 2 weeks in at Apple, I put my 2 weeks notice in, and a lot of my colleagues had seen the short film. And so it was getting shared around like the creative team, which was really cool. Um, so there was a producer I was working on my last project with at Apple, and she was like, "Oh, are you leaving to pursue more filmmaking?" And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna try and let's see. Hopefully, you know, I can like have some success in that." And I just was so eager to make films. I was like desperately itching to make something. And she was like, "Oh, are you talking to production companies?" And I said, "Yeah, there's a couple, but we're just chatting right now." People chat to production companies for like years. It's like dating. You're like seeing if you're gonna be a match. And she was like, "Have you thought of Iconoclast?" And I was like, I kind of like scoffed at her. I was like, "Yeah, I mean, obviously, but they're like my like reach school."
Yeah,
So I was like, I didn't consider them like now. Like,
attainable. Okay,
yeah,
yeah.
at all. I mean, they have such huge names, like huge names from filmmakers who had influenced me before I even knew I was interested in film. So I was like, I mean, yes, but I don't have like a contact there. And she said, I do. Like, can I send your short film to the producer there? And I was like, of course you can send short film to the producer. Of course you can do whatever you want. And then I think like very soon after that, less than a week after that, um, she heard from the producer and they loved the film. They wanted to get on a call. And so I chatted with um, the LA office first. They have offices all over the world. And then I chatted with um, the France team, one of the guys who's also a partner at the company. He's like this French Algerian dude. And
Did I meet him?
yeah, you met
Okay, yeah. Murad? Is that the
Yeah, we
name?
went to this PSG match in Paris, and I went with Murad. He's like
And I
iconic.
went with Milton. We
Yeah,
ended up meeting up after.
yeah, we met up. He like pushed us into a car
Yeah.
and took us back to the city and drove us back to the city. But
Sh-
he's a legend.
He didn't. Yeah, yeah. He wasn't forcefully like abducting us. He was calling a cab for
He
us.
was calling a cab for us and like
So kindly. Yeah.
so kindly. It was like such a busy street. But yeah, I talked to him. He accidentally FaceTimed me. They were like, "Oh, he's gonna call you in like a couple of days," and then he called me like an hour later. I was in like a Phil's parking lot and like gross and sweaty, and he like accidentally called me, and he was like, "Oh, actually, I'll call you back in 20 minutes." And so I was like FaceTiming him in the parking lot, and he was like, I just think like you have a very important voice in cinema. Like I think beyond commercials, like I think you have a lot to say. And I was like super humbled. I was like, I feel seen. Like he understands. He had seen the treatment for the Oath film. They really wanted to make it with me, um, and it was cool because they're thinking like so much more beyond just commercial. They're thinking like, how can we do more movies? How can And that's the type of thinking that I wanted. Um, and he said, let's sign. Like let's get married, basically. And I was like, okay, perfect. And so I signed with them and I signed with Newland within like the same week, which
Wow.
was a cool feeling.
Yeah,
Very cool feeling. So yeah.
that's amazing. So transitioning to that new life of yours as a full-time signed filmmaker, what does a typical day look like? Like, how did obviously shifting from the corporate world, 9 to 5 life, um, what does your kind of day-to-day look like?
Every day is different. Like it depends if I'm what I'm working on. But usually I try to stay disciplined in like my schedule so that I feel like it's just better for me to make sure that I'm waking up early. I try to like go for a walk outside. I read that if you go outside within like the first hour of when you wake up, you're supposed to like live longer.
Hmm.
So go outside, try to get a little bit of sun, drink a coffee, listen to a podcast or something or some music, and then start writing usually. So it depends if I'm like working on a treatment or if I'm working on a script, but either way, I'm usually like tucked away on a computer and then I'll take breaks throughout the day. But I feel like my brain stops wanting to write at like when the sun goes down. So like I feel more productive in that way, get all my work done by sundown, and then after that I feel like I'm inputting myself in other ways like films or reading or going to a gallery or talking to people. Like that's usually how I function. Try to work out somewhere in between that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Um, I love that. Um, Now, as you think about your career and your journey, what are you looking forward to? Like, what are you working on? Is there anything exciting that you can share? Um, I'm not gonna spoil anything, but yeah, what are you working on right now?
Well, I'm working on the short finally, trying to get that produced in 2023. I think we have a timeline for that. Um, and then there's a music video coming out in the new year, in the spring, early spring. But yeah,
Massive.
it'll be an exciting one. I haven't done a music video yet, so I'm excited.
Um, is there anything you can share about that process, about um, what that looks like for you, like in terms, not even timeline, but just the process? You have a very big music video coming up. I feel honored that you shared that with me. But yeah, what does that look like in terms of like the pitching process and connecting with an artist and helping them tell their story while kind of using your like creative language, I guess.
Yeah, I think this one is interesting. I feel like it's unique to maybe other director artist experiences because he's not trying to tell his story, this artist in particular. He kind of was just like, here's the track, then didn't really give me much direction, which is really, really like, I mean, I was so fortunate because I feel like there was no limitations in what I was able to pitch. Um, so I had this like idea kind of when we were in Paris.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was thinking about it and it just kind of was like inside and I was like, maybe I can like find an artist to make music to this idea. And then I got back to New York, and then my production company sent me the song, and I was like, whoa, this is just already kind of perfect to what the idea is. And I feel like the stars were very aligned in that way. And then we did like a first pass, gave it to the label, and then the artist and I got on like a FaceTime and talked about it, and he suggested a couple of things, and he has great tastes. So I was really lucky about that too. And but other than that, he's like letting me really do my thing, which I feel really fortunate that he's giving me the freedom to do that. He's a little bit like he just trusts me a lot, which I'm very grateful for. And he's a real one. That's all I can say.
um, Without spoiling anything, is there anything that you can share about the concept? Like, what is it? What are the maybe any sort of themes, um, or is that not allowed?
Mm, let's save it.
Okay.
I think we should save it. I don't
Okay.
like to talk about projects too much before they're out. I don't even like to talk about them after they're out.
This is
There's
really hard for you,
It's so hard
huh?
for me. I think David Lynch said this where there's like someone interviewing him about his film, and he says, "I don't want to talk about my film. Like the film is doing the talking."
Mm.
I'm so like I really resonated with that.
We'll make sure that when it does come out, we'll share a clip of it or something so
Yeah,
that folks can tune in.
I think the only thing that I'll say about it is I feel like I think it's gonna be important forever. You know?
Wow,
Yeah.
I love that. I want to transition a little bit into like more of a reflection as we kind of close out over the next few minutes. Um, First by talking a little bit about your mental health and kind of, um, I don't know, I'm just curious about as in your role in life, like how do you care for your mental health and how do you find joy? How do you find balance? I don't know if those are things that you struggle with or
Yeah.
things that you feel like you have designed into your life and your routine.
Yeah. I've been learning a lot about mental health, especially this year, because I had a hard time in the middle of the year. And I was like still trying to really stick with the same schedule and work. Then I was getting frustrated because I would try to write and nothing would come out. And I think it was because I wasn't dealing with certain things. And I feel like this word surrender was like very important for me at that time and still is. And I kind of surrendered to like what I was feeling, and then I gave myself some like a grace period where I was like, okay, I need to just go connect with nature. And I think doing that helped a lot, and I still try to do that. So connecting with nature, writing, connecting with myself, and connecting with people, those like few things have helped me a lot, I think. Um, and I'm learning more about myself too. I feel like maybe I've changed since the pandemic, where like I need like a lot of time with other people, but I need a good amount of time with myself because when you're with people, you can't really listen to your own thoughts, you know? So finding that balance right now, I think, has helped quite a bit.
Yeah, and spot on. I think that's like a the perfect balance that we strive to create.
Yeah,
That helps, that allows us and empowers us to create at our like highest potential.
yeah.
I love that. When you said connecting with nature, what does that look like? And even connecting with others.
Well, we don't have a lot of nature in New York, but I try to go to the park like every day, at least for a walk, because it's so much quieter. But here it was like, I mean, you have beaches around you. I think being by water is so like spiritual.
Yeah.
So like when I was really going through like my hard time, I went to like the beach and I went into the ocean and I was like baptizing myself. Astaghfirullah. But like that's kind of what I felt like, just to like have a
Like
cleansing,
yeah,
inward and
100%.
outward, you know? That helped. Nature is just healing. Forget how I think sometimes we you realize how tiny you are and kind of how insignificant you are when you're in nature to be around something that's so grand.
And so perfect in so many ways as well.
Yeah.
Speaking of mental health, and caring for it. I'm curious about your relationship with social media and how it affects your mental health. And I ask you this because I think as an artist, as a creative, as a filmmaker, any sort of creative medium, um, and I know you don't feel like you have a personal brand, but we
Stop putting me in a
no,
box.
no, no, I'm not. You said that. I'm curious about how I feel like we need it at times too, right? To like to share the work that we do, or
Yeah,
for
of
you as an
course.
artist, as a filmmaker, to share the work that you do. But how do you balance the that constant state of scrolling or that potential that I mean I experience it a lot, but I don't know how you kind of try to maybe keep it disciplined, or do you, or how does it affect you?
I think there was like a period when I first got Instagram where I was like kind of obsessed with it.
It went
And,
straight to Instagram too, which is
huh?
I love it. It's just like we all know it's
Social media,
Instagram.
like for me, it's Instagram. Let's
Yeah.
not play the game. All right. Some people, it's Twitter. I love Twitter. I think Twitter is
Astaghfirullah.
funny. I know. It's kind of problematic these days. But I'm so visual. I just love pictures, but you need words, you know? You need to read. So, um, but I think I feel like Instagram is fun now. Like I enjoy going on it. I don't struggle with it like being on it too much anymore, where I think I did earlier in the past. But now it's like I don't know, I feel like it's fun. I love to see what my friends are up to, but also I learn a lot. Like I think Instagram is being used in a way that's for information too, which I really love about it. Like you kind of can't ignore what's going on in the world, which is so it's so different than what kind of life we were living like even like 5 years ago.
Mhm.
So I think it's cool, and I use it a lot for, you know, like learning and inspiration to like learning about different photographers, different artists. It's a cool way to be connected, and I feel like I've built such a cool little community on there where I've met friends through Instagram and then meet them in real life, and they're like my homies now, you know. Oh yeah, you're one of them.
Right
What's
here.
up? Day
Um,
one. It's so true.
yeah. No, I love that.
URL to IRL, baby.
Wow. Poetic.
I'm from advertising, you know.
um, no, I love that. Thank you for sharing. I asked because I personally just need advice because I struggle with it. I'm just like,
Oh, do you have the screen time thing?
yeah, it doesn't work.
You deleted the app though, didn't you?
I deleted it and then 3 days later I was back on it.
3 days later.
So
Maybe you should delete it while you're in Hawaii.
yeah, for sure.
You're not gonna do that. You're like, I gotta post my thought pictures.
Okay.
Just
Moving
kidding.
forward. Yeah, I guess in the spirit of reflecting, I'm curious about self-doubt as an artist. Like, what is self-doubt like for you, and how often do you experience it?
Every day, every second of every day, obviously. Um,
Obviously.
no, everybody deals with this, right? Like I still grapple with it sometimes, but now I feel it like I think I struggled with it more when I was working in corporate, actually, because it's so highly competitive. But there's a beautiful thing about filmmaking. I mean, it's competitive, I'm sure, but nobody can really mimic your voice. Even if you try to be like another filmmaker, no one can actually have your voice. So sometimes I have self doubt of like, is the script right or is it strong enough or, you know, those kinds of things. But as long as I feel like I'm being honest and I'm really like looking at the work that I do and thinking, is this something that I want to see in the world? Then I feel like I'm in a pretty good place. But I mean, I have self doubt even when I wake up and I go to shoots, you know, in the morning when I wake up and I go for call time and stuff. Like, I still experience that every day. But it's part of the process. I think it makes you sharper.
In what way?
I mean, you should not doubt, but I feel like you should have some level of like fear. You're trying to make your best work possible, not even the best, your best, right? Like, and I think if you have a little bit of fear when you do that your work, like you can't help but make it the best, you know?
Yeah. Fear can be healthy at times.
Yeah, sometimes.
Sometimes. Um, no, that's great. Um, what motivates you and drives you now? Like, how do you stay motivated? And um, is there anything that keeps you going when you feel uh, stuck?
Yeah. Sometimes I listen to interviews like from people who I really admire, or like I read. Sometimes I just have to close my laptop. That helps. People are the most inspiring thing though. Like sometimes I just have to like watch movies, but then other days I really just want to be around people, like listening to conversations, listening to how people interact and what they're doing, like inspiring people inspire people, you know?
Mm,
So that's how I get myself out of it, like thinking about human potential. And I wonder what mine is sometimes. So I think that helps me to continue. But
yeah, that's very cool. That actually, it's another question I had, which is kind of a follow up to that. You were thinking about human potential and wondering what what yours is. I'm curious about what kind of in your current state, what you think your role is in life and as an artist and kind of how you view yourself.
it's so funny that question because I feel like I'm so tiny, tiny, you know? Um, I don't know what my role is. I just feel like I just want to tell stories that are true, like truthful stories. I mean, they can be fiction, but they have to come from a source of truth. So I don't know what my role is. Maybe just to be myself, I think, because there's not a lot of people maybe doing what I'm doing yet. So maybe just by doing what I'm doing, that could maybe make more people feel like that they can do the same thing. And then when there's more of us doing it, we'll just be a stronger collective. But I don't know if I necessarily have a role. Do you think I have a role? Do you have a role?
um, yeah, it's a great question.
It's a hard question.
Great way to avoid the. No, I'm kidding.
I know. Let's
Um,
flip it back around and
yeah,
yeah.
I think you have a role. Actually, I just in thinking about this conversation, which I really enjoyed. Um, I admire you so much. I feel like you're such an incredible and have always been such an incredible artist and human. And I think those go hand in hand with you. Um, and I think your role is whatever you see um, yourself creating, like um, whatever that inkling is inside that like kind of pushes you towards your purpose is your role in life. And maybe we don't know those things until much later.
Yeah.
Um, when I think about myself, I think I've known this since I was a kid, but building bridges is at the core of
Mm-hmm.
what I care about and um, connecting to connecting communities to each other. And I think a lot of that comes from, again, being a kid and being mixed
Yeah.
and being child of immigrants and not having any sort of sense of um, feeling that like I had community that felt like um, was truly mine, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think in that, a lot of the work that I've done has been around trying to create that for myself, you know? So I think there are different ways and different mediums that we can do that. This podcast is one of them. But yeah, I
I
think
love this
that's like,
podcast. It's my favorite podcast.
thank you. I'll Venmo you later for saying that. No, but yeah. So I don't know. I have very grand visions for myself, but I think a lot of it is rooted in those kind of two guiding lights in my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of how
Thank
I
you for
feel.
answering that question for me. I had a little bit of a
No, absolutely. You had a self-doubt moment.
I had a self-doubt moment. I was like, what is my
um,
purpose?
and it's also like sometimes we don't know, and that's okay. You know.
Who was it that said like you don't understand your life when it's going forward, but you make sense backwards? It's a famous quote. I can't remember who said it, but I think about that. Maybe
Yeah.
I'm doing it right now, and hopefully it'll make sense in the end.
Yeah. I'm sure it will. A couple more questions, and then we're gonna go to rapid fire.
Okay.
Okay. Um, as you've gotten older, what has become more important to you and what's become less important?
Um, I mean, I feel like that's such a boring answer, but I feel like my life has changed so much in the last decade. Specifically, like the last 5 years have been super different, and everything keeps changing. People, cities, like, you know, jobs, circumstance, bank account, all of it. But, I'm trying to be better with like balance. So, like my family, keeping my family very close to me as like the constants in my life. I think that's super important. Forgot your question.
No, you answered it. What's become more important? What's become less important?
Yeah, my family has become more and more important to me as I've gotten older, for sure. Um, Less important? I don't know. Let's see. Wondering what people think. Hmm, become more protective over my time and the people that I'm spending it with.
Mm.
Hmm, I've become a lot more intentional, I think, with everything. So even when I'm like taking on certain projects, I try to be intentional about all of it. Like, is this what I want to be doing? Is this going to help people? Is it going to help me? What is my intention with it? So it's kind of cutting the fat out in like a lot of areas of my life.
Love that. I don't know if you realize this, but you've just been dropping gems this whole
Really?
conversation.
Have
Yeah,
I? Wow.
100%. David,
Looking for
yeah,
the
we got a
nod
thumbs
of
up from
assurance.
David. Um, Shout out to our incredible producer who's here with us.
Director David.
Director,
Writer director.
yeah, and yeah. I one last question is, um, you talked about how the past 5 years have changed pretty dramatically, and so I'm curious about what success looks like for you, maybe over the next five.
Yo, I never know how to answer this question because I don't even know what I'm doing like tomorrow. I just want to make movies. I just want to do more movies and like longer form. Everything I've done right now has been very short. Even like this short film script is like 20 something pages, which is like the longest thing I've written at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely have a couple of ideas for feature length films that I want to explore. I hope I can like get into a position where I've released one maybe in 5 years or hopefully shooting one by then. Um, but I just want to do more of that, connect with more people around the world who are doing things like that, build more of a community, and meet people like you. Yeah, that's what I hope to be doing. And also like I would love to mentor. I think
Mm.
that like, it's so important if you're interested in film to have peers who are helping you. And that doesn't mean that they have to help you even creatively, but even like navigating the space is so confusing. People who can connect you to the right people, like that, like editors even, or people who are want to do projects with you. Like that stuff is so hard when you're so new, and all you want to do is start, but you don't know where. So yeah,
For anyone who is interested in Amara's mentorship,
my mentorship program of zero.
your fellowship, no, where can they find you?
They can just email me. It's on my website. Maybe they'll get emotional when they go on it.
Click play on the piano piece. That's the music in the background as you scroll and write an email.
Yeah.
Um, I love that. Okay, we're gonna quickly do rapid fire. Um,
I'm thinking of Santi's song, Rapid Fire.
that's a great one.
That's my
Um,
intro song. I want that to be my intro song.
for this,
hmm
actually.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I love it. Okay. Rapid fire
Okay.
by Santi. You ready? Just
Yeah,
quick
yellow.
responses.
Okay.
Yalla. A book that changed your life.
Oh, that changed my life. The Alchemist. It's,
That's like my favorite book of all time.
it's a classic.
Why did it change your life?
Mm, I don't know. It made me like brought me to tears when I was like a kid, and it's like talking about signs. It's talking about your purpose, listening to the universe. Like you don't think that way when you're so young, maybe. Well, some people do. I wasn't thinking about that. So I think it changed my perspective and it made me like pay attention to things a little bit more, maybe. Um, and it's just a beautifully written book.
Yeah. It's like the coolest self-help book you can ever read without realizing it's a self-help book
Yeah,
because it's fictional.
yeah.
Um, okay, love it. A movie that you'll never get sick of.
Oh, a movie that I'll never get sick of. Hmm. Harry Potter? I'm just kidding. um, I
That
feel
could be
like
the answer.
that's no, no, no. I love. I mean, duh. We have to watch that every year during the holidays.
Yeah.
But there's a movie called La Haine. It's kind of an intense film, but it's like one of my favorite films of all time.
Lahaine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I haven't seen it, but I will look for
It's
it.
like the first one of the first films that I watched where I was like, whoa, cinema can be like this. It's like black and white, shot in 35, with young Vincent Cassel roaming the streets of France.
Amazing.
Yeah. It's not romanticized at all, like the way that I said it, though. It's actually a very hard watch, but you should watch it.
Thank you. I will. Favorite quality about yourself?
Oh. Hmm. I'm not supposed to think too much. Ah, I feel like I can roll with the punches, you know?
Adaptable, flexible,
Flexible, go with the flow.
go with
Like,
the flow.
don't think too much, just keep it moving.
Um, a moment you're most proud of.
My first short film. That was a big, big one for me. Big
Twin
moment.
Flame.
Yeah, even though it's a tiny little film, it's like 2 minutes long.
It was received really well, but I'm curious when you say like you put it out into the world, how did you put it out? Did you just release it like independently?
Yeah, I mean, I think I got in contact with some publications,
Hmm.
like Director's Library and Boom, and they released it. And then other than that, I just put it out on like the internet on Vimeo. But I mean, like even if I got like 10 views and it wasn't received well, I would have still felt the same way because I finished a film,
Yeah,
which is like hard to finish a film, period, even if it's 2 minutes long or 2 hours long. Like I think that's just it. It's just
yeah.
it's such a nice feeling.
It's a great mentality to have as well, to encourage yourself to keep creating.
Yeah.
I like how I made this rapid fire and I'm asking follow-up questions, so apologies. We're almost there. Favorite piece of advice?
Favorite piece of advice. Oh, I feel like your failures teach you more than your success does. I feel like that was something that I learned, and is really a strong piece of advice because then you, every time you fail, then you're not looking at it from a negative perspective. You're learning something, and you use that for your next feat. Um,
That's great. Up and coming artists that you're paying attention to?
Musical artist?
Any artist? Like, what are you
Hmm.
inspired by?
What am I listening to these days? Oh, I'm listening to like old things. Let's see. I mean, I think the artist that I'm interested in right now is like the one that I mentioned in the beginning of this podcast, Dina Amar. She just did her first film, so I'm curious to see what she does next.
I love it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, the last little space is for anything, any last words that you want to share, any thoughts, anything, and that's okay if you don't have anything to
I want to share that I'm very excited to be on your podcast.
share.
I'm shy. I was like, I don't know if I want to do it, but
I've been trying to get you on this podcast for many years.
I know.
Like,
I think I'm an avoidant.
no, I think you just felt, I mean, I remember talking about this with you, but you felt like you weren't, like you didn't have anything to show for it. I remember you saying something
Yeah.
like that. You were like, I'm just not ready. Like, what do I have to
Yeah, I was like,
talk
you want to
about?
talk about some commercials?
No, but even in your work in at Apple, like I think it was already enough to share because you just do such great work and you have such a um, really unique and a dope perspective. So it's only grown, and you're right, like in the spirit of Ucht. things take time and when they happen when they're supposed to.
Yeah.
And so I'm so happy that I'm catching you now, as you've just literally recently won a Young Guns 20 award, 2022, is it 2020?
20.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a director in your first, year and a half of being full-time
Alhamdulillah.
director. Yeah. And you have so much more to come. So I'm just honored to be your friend and to call you a dear friend of mine and also um,
Habibi.
collaborator and just so inspired by you. So thank you so much for joining, the conversation and um, yeah, very much looking forward to your continued success.
Inshallah. Thank you. And thank you for making this podcast and discovering amazing people from it.
Thank you. It's very
And you have
kind.
such a good podcast voice. It's unfair.
I've been working on it.